Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to model and texture any type of car wheel in Blender. In this video, I'm going to model these beautiful Porsche tires as an example, but the process I'm going to share with you is easily replicable on any other type of wheel. Also, don't worry if you are a beginner. I'll make sure to explain myself as best as I can so that you'll understand correctly every part of this video. Without further ado, let's get modeling. Open up a new Blender scene and delete the default cube. Then import a picture of the tire you want to recreate. You can find the one I'm using right now on my Patreon channel completely for free. Now look at your reference closely. You can notice there is one part that is mirrored multiple times across the rim, which generally is the number of bolts that hold the tire to the rest of the car. In my case, this number is 5, so I added a circle with 5 vertices, but you can replace this with the amount of bolts your tire has. I decreased the radius to match the inner part of my rim. Then I entered edit mode and pressed Shift plus Control plus B to bevel all the vertices in order to match this shape. Now that you have a general shape of the rim, subdivide it and delete everything except for one side. Then extrude it inward to close the center part of the shape where we're going to create the bolts holes later. Then let's get to model one of the parts of the rim. I extruded this part 2 times because, as you can see, the center of the wheel is a little bit inwards compared to the rest. Then I just continued modeling, following the image as a reference. During this process, obviously remember to maintain good topology as we're going to apply a subdivision modifier. So make sure that your model doesn't have any amount of triangles or n-gons. If you notice, the right side of what we have done can be mirrored on the left side. So you can position your 3D cursor in the center of the model, then set your pivot point to 3D cursor, delete this part, duplicate it with Shift plus D, and mirror it with S plus Y minus 1. Also, don't forget to select all, merge by distance, and recalculate the normals with Shift plus N. Finally, add a subdivision modifier with Control plus 2, and add some supporting edge loops where needed. Now that we have the base shape of one of the parts of our rim, we can simply mirror it around to complete it. Place your cursor at the center of your wheel, which in my case is the world origin, then select everything in edit mode and press Alt plus E, then spin. Check the box that says Use Duplicates. Then enter in the steps parameter the amount of times your geometry has to be repeated to complete a whole rotation, which in my case is 5. Sometimes your rim will come out perfect, but in my case I had to merge some vertices. Anyway, I suggest you to always check for overlapping geometry by selecting everything and merging by distance. And now you can see that there's a perfect circle in the center of the wheel. Instead of aligning all the vertices manually, we're going to use loop tools. If you don't have them enabled, go here in the Edit tab and click on Preferences, then Add-ons and search for loop tools, then check this box to enable them. Now you can select this edge loop and right-click, then go here in Loop Tools and press Circle. After that, I added some reinforcing geometry and passed on making the bolts holes. We won't need this part for now because we can add a mirror modifier on the x-axis. Don't forget to put it at the top of the modifier's hierarchy and to make sure that these vertices on the center are placed on the y-axis. After setting the mirror modifier, I tidied up my topology using the Relax Loop tool, found here, but for convenience I assigned Shift plus R as a shortcut since I use it often. After that, I started to move some vertices to create some space where we're going to make our holes. I recommend to use at least 4 faces per hole so that you'll get a better result in the end. After you set it up your faces, inset them, and use the Circle Loop tool to make them round. Align these faces to match your reference, then repeat this operation with any other type of hole, like this one that is cut in half. In this type of situation, you can just inset your hole, then delete these edges and align the border of your hole to the y-axis. Then simply repeat the process as we did before. And finally, we can focus on giving tridimensionality to our rim. Start by pushing your reference away if you haven't done yet, then extrude the faces for the holes. From now on, I recommend you to use some other references in order to get a better idea of how the dimensions of your tire should be. For this reason, I'm going to use a software called Pureref to display my images on the screen while I'm working. You can find a link to download Pureref in the description. Now, based on the design of your wheel, you'll have to add all the other details that characterize it. For example, I have to push the inner part of the rim inwards, as I said earlier. So I insetted the faces I wanted to use. Then I simply extruded them in and adjusted the borders to make it look more pleasing to the eye and similar to the original. Note that in the process of making this, I used a bevel modifier. To use it, simply add it to the Modifiers tab and put it before the Subdivision modifier. Then set the segments to 2, the amount to 0.01, the limit method to weight, and the shape to 1 under the Profile tab. Once you've done that, simply select the edges you want to sharpen, then press N and increase the mean bevel weight to 1.0. And to complete my design, I thickened the borders of the rim by extruding these parts with individual origins as a pivot point. Our rim is almost ready. Just select everything and extrude it backward. Flatten the faces and make sure to remove any unnecessary bevels or vertices. Then select one of the borders and press Shift+G, then face angles to select similar and add a bevel. And now we have to bend our rim a little to match our desired shape. Obviously, this changes depending on your wheel. Press O to enable proportional editing, or click on this button, then move the center inwards. Use the scroll wheel to change the influence of the proportional editing. In my case, I firstly brought the center part of the rim inwards, then brought the spokes a little bit forward. Now that the inner part of the wheel is done, let's make the outer part. Add a new circle with a good amount of vertices and obviously add a subdivision modifier to it. Then simply use extrusion and scale to define the shape of the outer lip. Also modify the length of the spokes if needed. I don't know why, but the bevel modifier didn't seem to work here. So as an alternative, you can use simple bevels made with Ctrl+B. Just make sure to set the segments to 2 and the shape to 1 in the bevel settings. And here's how my rim is looking. Before passing on the rest of the tire, let's also make this little valve stem. I started from a cylinder with 6 vertices, and I modeled every detail of the stem without paying too much attention to proportions. Then once I finished, I passed some time scaling it and trying to make it look as close as possible to my reference. As you can see here, I added a solidify modifier to the outer part of my wheel. You can put it if you'd like to have a more realistic effect. But now let's pass on making the barrel. This is going to be very simple. Just extrude this border out until you want, Then put an edge loop in the middle and delete this part here. Finally, place your 3D cursor at the center of this circle and mirror every part of this object on the x-axis, in my case. Don't forget to merge duplicates with M and to recalculate normals with Shift+N. And the rim is fully finished. Now let's make the tire. For this video, I'm going to make a very simple tire, but maybe let me know if you'd like to see a more detailed version in the future. Start by duplicating one of the circles of the rim and separate it from the rest with P, then Selection. After that, delete the Solidify modifier from the newly created object and set its origin at the center of the wheel so that we can add a mirror modifier on the Z-axis. After doing this, you'll just have to follow the shape of your reference's tire and create a smooth curve between the sidewall and the tire tread. Obviously, make sure to check for duplicates, but also make sure that the inner part of your tire properly fits onto the rim for a more realistic effect. And finally, make sure to mark these edge loop as a seam so we can use it later to texture the wheel. There are only two things left to model: a cap for the center and some bolts. For the cap, I simply duplicated these faces from the rim and separated them to a new object. Then I applied the mirror modifier to preserve the shape and used grid fill and proportional editing to create the rest. And now for the bolts. Create a circle where your bolt should be, then set its number of vertices to 6 and start modeling. Once you've completed one bolt, just spin it around and you've done. But if you want to add another touch of realism, pick each one of your bolts and rotate them randomly. Now that we are finished modeling, we can finally pass on, making our wheel look beautiful with some shading. But first, let's switch to Render View mode here in the top right corner of our viewport, and let's set up some light. For this purpose, I'm going to use an add-on called Tri-Lighting, which you can find here in the Preferences menu searching for Light in the Add-ons tab. After enabling it, press Shift-A to add an object, then go into the Light section and click 3-point lights while selecting the object you want to illuminate. Regulate the base energy parameter to match your liking. Then click away and prepare to start shading your wheel. Let's start from the bolts. Select them and position your mouse cursor in the bottom left corner, then simply drag it up to open a new window. Once you've done that, click this icon and switch to the shader editor, where we're going to create our materials. Then click on New and give a name to your material. For my bolts, I'm obviously going to make a metal material. For this reason, I added 2 color ramps, one for the metallic and one for the roughness. Adjust them like you see on screen, then add a bump node for the normal and a Voronoi texture attached to it in the strength input. And after that, add a mapping node and a noise texture. Instead, for the roughness, add a noise texture node and use the Node Wrangler add-on to add some mapping nodes. If you don't have it enabled, just search for it in the add-ons menu like we did before. Then to use it, select the node you want to map and press Ctrl+T and attach this mapping node to the other noise texture too. After that, you can just play around with the values and see what seems to be the best for you. After playing around for some time, I think these are probably the best settings. And now let's make the rest of the rim. Obviously, this part changes depending on your type of wheel, but in my case, I have to do a sort of black brushed metal, so let's start. I rename my material brushed black metal, then I change the base color to a dark gray and set the metallicness to 1. After that, I added a color ramp on the roughness like we did before, and added a noise texture. For the latter, I used a scale of 425, a level of detail of 15, and a roughness of 0.8. Then I simply played with the color ramp until I liked it. After I had finished with the color ramp, I moved these nodes to add a bump node for the normal. I connected my color ramp to it and set the strength to 0.222. Also, I added another color ramp to the base color and decreased the metallic to 0.783. Finally, let's apply this material to the barrel of the wheel and pass on texturing the tires. Just select the barrel and select your material here in the Material tab. Now to work with our tire, we'll firstly have to apply the mirror modifier. So go into the Modifiers tab and click on this button or press Ctrl+A. Now select the tire tread and create a new material. For this tire, I'm going to use a simple texture, which you can find on my Patreon, along with all the references I'm using. Just drag the color, the normal, and the roughness into the shader editor. Then just connect them to the principled BSDF in order, making sure that you add a bump node between the normal texture and the BSDF input. We've set our material correctly, yet we can't see how our material looks. That's because our textures are not mapped correctly. To map them, you'll need to add a node wrangler to all of them and open another window next to this one called UV Editor. Once you've done that, set your preview image to one of the tires and go into edit mode. With your tire tread selected, press U, then unwrap. Then go into the UV editor. Press A to select all and press U again. Then Smart UV Project, and once again press Follow Active Quads. Now you can scale and move your UV map to fit your texture. Once you've done that, your tire should start to look beautiful. And to complete it, you'll just need to texture the sidewall. So let's do that. You can add another material to your object by pressing the plus icon in the Materials tab. For this part, we'll also use a custom texture, which I already used in my previous car modeling tutorial series that I invite you to check out. Anyway, drag these two textures into your newly created material and connect them into the principled BSDF in the same way we did before. Now select the parts you want your sidewall to appear on, then press your material in the Materials tab and click Assign. Go into your UV editor so you can map your textures. Simply select your sidewall, press U, then unwrap, and repeat the same process as before. Also, in the shader editor, make sure to change this value from repeat to clip on both textures. Once our mapping is done, we can pass on, making this material look a little more realistic. Start by adding a color ramp here so that we can control how our texture looks. I recommend to use a dark gray on the right and a slightly darker one on the left. After doing that, make some space here to add a noise texture connected to a normal map node, which you can add to the other normal map we did before. As for the noise texture, I used a scale of 1000, a level of detail of 15, and a roughness of 1. Our wheel is already looking pretty cool, but we need to complete it with the center cap. This part of the rim changes heavily based on your wheel model, but in my case, I only have to make a Porsche sticker in the center. I added a new material and called it Logo. Then I imported the brushed metal material we did earlier and made a copy by pressing this button here so that we can modify it. I got this Porsche logo image, which you can find on my Patreon, and added a mix shader node at the end of my material, using this texture's alpha channel as a factor. Then I added a new principled BSDF that I connected to the second pin of my mix node and connected the texture to the base color. Once you've done that, set this parameter to clip. Then go into edit mode, select these faces and go into side view. Now open the UV editor, and while hovering your mouse on these faces, press U, then Project from View, and adjust your image in the editor. The only thing remaining now is to give this sticker some shining and depth. You can see I already set the metallicness to 1 and increased the roughness by a little, but then I added a separate color node, followed by a combine color node and a bump node to give this Porsche's logo a beautiful effect. Finally, I quickly colored the valve stem with the materials I had. I added a simple HDRI that I found on Polyhaven, and here's is our final result. I also created a small scene to display them quickly, and here is the final render. I really hope you liked the content of this video. If you did, please let me know by leaving a like and maybe following this channel, and if you didn't, leave a comment to let me know why. This said, I'd also like to thank y'all for reaching 4,000 subs here on YouTube, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.